I've done on these Oopart bowls that are in Egypt, showing you a strange craftsmanship of a time that doesn't appear or doesn't show to be readily available at that time. In fact, I've made a video recently that showed they're one of these types of bowls, a little more crude, but still, nevertheless, made the same way and intricately carved on the outside. But it's up in one of the cattle Hoyuk sites known as Ayanlar Hoyuk, or one of the Göbekli Tepe sites known as Ayanlar Hoyuk. So let's take a look at this. This is Science versus Myth, or Science Against Myth, a site where a lady who's worked with stone for quite a few years decided to take on the possibility of using crude tools known at the time in stone versus stone and copper drills, and tried to make something that's analogous with the stone bowls that we referred to in ancient Egypt. Before I get into it totally, one thing that came to mind how the lids of these are disappeared is that you do find a few of them that are gold inlaid around the top, and probably the lid was done as such, and we're probably lucky we have a few of them that even have any gold on them anymore, and that's probably where that actually went. So let's look into this, and it's kind of a time lapse. And it'll show her work. It took her over 6 months to do this, about 2 months to come up with the idea and the tools and things. And you can see she'd worked with pecking stones and other chips. She got to one point and there was a softening stone in one of the areas, and she just had to start doing it this way. And you can see she's grinding one against the other, stone versus stone. And effectively here, she's using the weight of the stone just sitting down on the other stones, kept by up under it with that little point that's right there, to a certain height, spindling it around like on a potter's wheel, or this is effectively a lathe type of tool workmanship, and she's made this contraption that is holding it all in and holding her spindle working. Now, if there was something that held her spindle on not at just one point, but would be able to hold it here and here at another point, that would probably also work a lot better. You'll find at one point she also changes this method a little bit, but in her other video that I've watched where she makes a duck, looks like just like Egyptian duck vase, and a few other items, she makes an even cruder looking type of A-frame, if you will, and it's really wrapped with animal hide. It's been stripped and then tightened around it while it was wet, and then whenever that tightens and dries up, it really tightens to a hold, and using that method. So you can see here at different angles she's put some rocks in here, and they're carving away at it, but it's quite wobbly still, and one could probably take the wobbled areas and work those down a little bit and get a little closer, and I think that's what she has done here. And an easier way to work it than this, she keeps repositioning them all the time, but you can see she's starting to really make some headway here. And the bottom of it's not going to be right, but she can fix that later. And working it over and over again, and you can see how it touches on and off of the stones, and really finding this one like here, it's an abrasive surface, like if you ever seen something like a gravestone and the edges of it are rough but the front is polished. Well, this is that roughed edge, and by grading against that, it's doing a whole lot. Now this end product becomes something real good, but if you read what was it saying at the first part, This is actually breccia marble and not diorite and granite forms that we're seeing there, and the Mohs scale is quite different. Although the grinding Mohs scale could be a little different. We'll talk about that a little more later, but let's just, zip through this here, showing the grinding of it, and really, in time-lapse, showing the pieces slowly coming to fruition. And now just having one size piece on the side here with the shape she's going to try to go for allows it, as it wobbles into it, to only eat the wobble out of it, and that gets it even more uniform. You can see here their husband gets involved on the top of this thing, really trying to spin it and go, because she has been doing this for months. Again, this took her over 6 months, from what I understand, from the point where we showed you her starting to chip it until the very end product, which you'll be surprised in. So he's really getting the thing going here for her for a little while, probably wearing himself out, and she's trying to hold it together so it doesn't shake, rattle, or get out of way. But also, if you'll look, she's holding an extra stone here and getting an extra carve on this part, because you'd always wonder, well, how they get that. Well, she's creating that, and by that process pinching in and creating a lip at the top. There's a grinding going on there, and even a close-up of her going through it. So it involved more than one person doing this. And then we're taking and sawing off the butt of this thing. And doing so, we're using the sand. And she's made a saw blade here that's just a copper blade saw, like they've shown you before. And this took days of cutting at for her to do. You can probably see her clothes change in there, I didn't notice. Now we get a different product going on. This was where she's taken and made a mold. So this would require something else, and something that we don't really see that much of. Although there are all those little dents that look like mortar and pestle grinding stones or something that people aren't sure exactly what they are, and that might have something to do with it, although we don't have the apparatus that's hooked up above it here. But this dish is made to hold on to pretty well and in situ pretty tight that bowl that she's working on. And this, although it's a wooden dowel, and now we are pinning it in 2 places, so keeping it from having much wobble to it, the bottom part of this right here going down into it is a copper tube like blade, which has a little serrations to the teeth, and she's added some abrasive to it and starting to work it from the top. She also comes up with, so you can see her chopping around and not really getting it going, and then she starts to really get it going, and it is spinning the bowl a little bit. And one would think, man, a couple of good blots of bitumen right in there, and that'd keep it from doing it, because in the shiftingness, it's kind of shifting the hole a little bit off to this side. If you notice in the slow movement, the way it's doing, it's kind of eating that way. Well, not much, but a little bit. So working through, and whoops. So she tries to figure out a better way to hang those balls of weight on there, which can just be sandbags and types of things. And so that's putting a direct pressure down on this. And by doing so, she's just doing something that is kind of like making old-fashioned ice cream. If you've ever seen one of those before they put the motors on them. We had one of those. Now they're antiques and worth a lot of money and stuff, but we had one of those. Just a bucket, and then it was a tin bucket on the inside of that with a covering that fit pretty good, and then a grinder on top of it, and you put ice down in it and salt on top of it, which melted the ice and made it colder, and you churn the heck out of that, and you just kept going and going and going. And we'd trade turns when we were kids, and then whenever it got tough to do, we got excited, but we tried to churn real hard, and it got to the point where you really couldn't do it. And that's when you knew you had ice cream. But you can look here at it, and she's taken and made a little plaster now, and plastered over the whole thing, holding it in situ, holding it tight in place. Just a blob over the whole thing, and then her hole that she's working. But she's starting to get down through it pretty good, and so it just looks like a mud slurry here eventually. And here's that copper blades on the tube, and the apparatus, and the weight that's on there, and somebody's old pillowcases. But sure enough, she's able to do that. Now she's trying to chip out by using another hard rock and a hammer. Now, it's a little illegal here because she's got an iron hammer and so on, but we'd have to say that she was doing this with a mallet, you know, kind of the way that they were doing it and stuff, and she could get different rocks too, but what the hell. The problem here being is that now that she's cored out that hole in there, there's still the plug in there, and it's still attached on the bottom, of course, and she's got to chip down in there and then try to fraction that out of there, which she successfully does here, by the way. But in doing so, she cracks the rim of it, and so you can still see this thing's kind of covered in plaster, and she's got it fairly well cleaned, and some of the junk that she's left down inside of it. Now here's the next step, where she takes this stick and takes an abrasive, which, if I could catch it right, is really about like again, whenever you see a gravestone type material and the edge on it that would be very rough, right? So she takes that with an abrasive and puts it in there, and the first idea is just going to do that with her feet and hold on to it and get it going, grinding around in there. And by the shape that she's used, it's going to grind that smooth and start grinding through it more and more. Again, she did this every day for over 6 months, and even some of the abrasive that's in there has been added, but a lot of it becomes from her grinding herself and so on. You can see this dumped out. Now, one problem or issue with this bowl is this isn't the end product, it seems, whenever we see this thing at the very end. So I don't know what kind of sleight of hand was used or anything in this, but there are tabs that are usually on these that are on either side here with a hole drawn through them. We're going to see how that's done here in a minute. And so all of the workmanship in that area is not shown apparently. And this being very gray and white ends up being very brown and red. But she's also showing here that while she did it, she broke off a chip on the left-hand side and then had to glue it back together into place, which I guess if you're an Egyptian, you threw the thing away. One could imagine working on something like this for 5.5 months, and then having a chip come out of the edge of it. Now, they could have glued that back together with bitumen, and there are some fractures around some of the ones that we see in Egypt, and one wonders if, well, they just let that go. We always thought the fractures go afterwards, and I would like to think so too. So it's a hell of an idea to throw away 5.5 months or more worth of work. That's another reason I've shown where when they build the pharaohs and they do all the statues, how the arms are stuck next to the bodies, and even Greek ones later, they have these little pieces where they're attached still that they work to try to go to. But if they freed the thing up, it would become extremely fragile. And even whenever they did that eventually, what they effectively did was complete it all except for the tab, and then use like string cutting, which she uses in another display here too, in another video, and cut it loose from there, mainly leaving the tab on the body and being able to work it from there, not the arm. A lot of people have said that's why a lot of the statues, you know, Venus de Milo and so on, are missing arms and so on. And if you look in the armholes of those, they have sockets, and quite often they're squared or shaped to be able to hold things, but also at a certain angle. And it looks like almost plug and play where they could put on different ones. But I think in a lot of that, there might have been some statues that had broken at one time, and then the addition of a fixed arm worked pretty good. But you have to make that smooth all the way around it and work, and it's an incredible amount of workmanship in itself. So you look at this bowl here, and she's got it pretty well worked to the nth degree, you would think. But then she starts working stone on stone and tries to polish this thing up to a little better of a shine. And in doing so, suddenly there's those tabs that are showing up in it. And I don't know where we suddenly get these tabs from. I don't want to call her out on this or anything. And it looks purple all of a sudden. And I think that's because there's probably a ultraviolet light that she's using, maybe to show different things inside of the stone. So that looks pretty good there. So you wonder about those holes on the side, and while it did have to be worked by hand all the way around it, the holes that go into it are easily done, and she's using a bow drill here, ripping it back and forth while it's going down through there, and that makes pretty good sense. And you can see the ropes wrapped around the shaft, and there's weight on the top of the shaft, and it's driving through it here, and there's that bowl. Now again, from what I understand, this looks like a super polishing, but what this really supposedly is that the bowl is wet, perhaps with baby oil, but a lot of people just said water. But you can see those tabs and the way this looks. And again, this is a type of marble from up in Russia, and so it looks a little bit different than what you would see in Egyptian work, but you can see the same flavor and the same ideal and the same flair. Now a lot of their bowls, which this only has an inner lip at a certain amount, are a whole lot smaller, showing you that they had to work it a whole lot more in the inside, and perhaps take something that they could only get in if they could get up under and get into there and start working it. But when you get to the point that they do, it's not like this. Not to call out this workmanship, because you could take this from here and keep going. One would wonder how many more months it would take to take this down to where it's 1/8 of an inch thin, or between 1/4 of an eighth, and pretty much symmetrical, like Petrie and others have noticed, where it goes all the way down and extremely thin, because this looks like it's almost 1 inch thick still. In those, strangely, even though it's gone to that thin point, you can still see these carve marks that are around it, looking like whatever's going on at the last bit of workmanship is something that's grinding the hell out of it, not something that's scuff and trying to make it look real polished. So there's a little difference in that effect. So that's pretty good looking though, right there. And one wonders if that's put on a polishing wheel or whatever they're done, because when you look at it here, it's not polished like that. You can still see some cut marks into it, so you'd have to work it from here to get all of those carvings and scratches all in it that you can even see from this angle. It's a beautiful rock though, with all its conglomerate of colors and stuff, so very similar to that. The other difference though is, and I can kind of tell how she did it now, this came out and it was wider, and she just took that down and made that. But you can see that flattening point. Those aren't really evident. But another thought to think of at this is that she's worked at this here now. I don't know, it's her she's done a few projects with this type deal and gotten it going on. But if she had been around it all of her life, and somebody who was an expert mason at doing it, and they had already figured out 101 different ways to help make sure you make it easier, faster, and better, then she'd probably have something a lot more going on. So it starts to make much more sense. The material here is breccia marble from the Narvsky open pit in the Karaskarev territory. I'll leave her name down in the comments, because I'm not going to try to pronounce that after trying that last one. Finish size is 80 by 135 millimeters. It started out at over 200 by 200 by 200 block. So hopefully right before it zoomed out there, you could just see all the scratches that are in this. And even though it's got a polish or buffing on the outside of it, it wasn't taken to that point. But all that she used here was wood, sandstone, corundum, which is a diamond and an extreme abrasive, almost akin to diamond. So that's the real key here. A grindstone and grinding agent was used by that. So those rocks that were around there and so on. Then there was also hemp string that was used, and that's very strong, as people know, and durable. So that helped a lot. And she also used alabaster and quartz rock. And so that's all that was really used in this. And they were basically all self-made tools: a grinding and drilling machine, a bow drill, a chambering tool, a grinding stone on a wooden handle, basically, and the copper saw, copper drills of various diameters. Pretty cool and unique here. You can see that workmanship. How long did it take her? Well, it took her total work time about 6 months. This is 6 to 8 hours a day, except for 2 days off a week. Making and testing the tools, it says, took about 2 months. But if she was to have been working with a family that did this forever, she'd probably have something that's a little more hooked up and a little better. Two emergency she wants to let you know occurred during the work process. An emergency at the roughing out stage. Almost a half of the block broke off due to a fault in the stone, which made it necessary to significantly reduce the height of the workpiece. So that's why it's a little more squat than it was, because working around the top of it, and she had a fracture there, so she had to start and pull it down from a little bit lower than that, from what I understand. And the other one was the little chip that's in the edge there. So looking at this, you can tell that she's got somewhere close and something that looks a lot like the one that we see at Göbekli Tepe sites, like Göbekli Tepe itself, but also the one that I just recently shown at Ayanlar Hoyuk. And we hope that other ones like this show up. But here's the strange thing. Few things about it. Again, I just touch up on the Egyptians are using a much harder stone, which could be accomplished, I guess, but she doesn't show that. And in fact, in another one, somebody asked her about trying to do diorite, and she does, and it's a little bit mixed results. Doesn't look like she's working with soft stone like this anymore, which is what the Egyptians show to a better point than this. Now, she only gave it 6 months, and if she would have put another 3 or 4 months into the object, she'd probably get it about there. One wonders how many of those would break when you try to get it to 1/8 of an inch thick and so on. And then what is that scouring that's still around on the inside that's not polished if you've done the ending like she does here to try to get it to that point? So it can't be just fine sanded forever and ever, taking off a paper thin layer day after day after day after day, because you wouldn't have the scouring that's what that looks like. There are anomalies here that in Egypt it didn't seem that they really had things of this level, and this has gotten people crazy to the point they claim UFOs, aliens, reptilian space creatures, relics from Atlantis, and all kinds of stuff. But this shows you that we don't give mankind enough credit, because you're able to do something here without even really having the background of families and a lineage of doing it beforehand, and all of the help and the 101 ways. And you can end up with something that looks real close to it, again, if you just work it a couple of months. Anomaly here too is, man, they had something that looked like this, kinda, without the tabs on the side, of about this level right here, maybe a little bit less. Way back at 10,000 BC at Ayanlar Hoyuk. And that is something that people probably don't want to give credit for people having for back then too. But those little sockets in the ground, and we've shown plaster from not shortly long after then. They even make their own plaster whenever they're drilling and this stuff comes out, and if you let it dry, it tries to harden like that. Doesn't take too much to get that ground up mush to turn into, with ash, water, a little bit of sand, which they're working with, here we go, can form a concrete type adhesive and put it in those little sockets We don't find any of these little pyramided T-pillars on the top of it, and no drills going down into it. And of course, the drill wouldn't have copper on it unless you want to really expand the Copper Age. But what if on the end of that drill you took the hardest stone that you could find? Always when I think of this, I think of the extreme long list the Sumerians had, which describe which stone scratches which stone, and they start out all the way at soft sandstone type, soapstone type material, and go all the way up through corundum, which again is what she used, and it's also much harder than all of this, although it cuts through this almost like butter in effect compared to what it would cut through granite and diorite. So let me know what y'all think down below, but this is one showing that the possibilities of humans are just something that's also lost to time. We look for lost civilizations, and it's right here in front of us whenever we're looking at these people, and we go, yeah, they didn't really have much going on, but da-da-da. No, they had a lot more going on. Advanced mathematics and everything. It's ingrained in the pyramid itself, showing you that these people knew something to this level. I think part of it was in case everything went to crap again, like it did at the Younger Dryas, that there would be something that would inspire people for ages and generations, and then eventually you might figure out how big around the world is, and because you had already messed with the pyramid for so long, you'd go, you know, that seems to go along with all these other numbers and these other mathematics, and therefore they kind of knew the earth was round, but also the size of it and all this other information that's trapped inside the pyramid whenever they built it for a purpose. You wonder what its purpose is, and there's nobody in there, there's no coffin. Well, the idea always has been resurrection. When they go to find Jesus and he's not there anymore, whenever we finally broke into the pyramid and they're not there anymore, and you think these people had a way of making it happen. You believe in that magic, so so strange looking at it. Let me know what y'all think down below, but this is an incredible craftsmanship done right now with stuff that's like what they used before. So, and you can see that it happens, and with stuff from before. I see a validity to this, but you again have to work it to another level, 1 or 2 levels above this in craftsmanship, and also in a Mohs scale. This I think shows 3.5 to 5, and what we're looking at is 7 or 8, which kind of even surpasses the copper drill and only gets to use the quartz to help out. Becomes a different endeavor. Like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy. Hit that bell. Make sure it's on. Peace.